This photograph, recovered from a forgotten military archive, is believed to have been taken sometime in late 1944, inside a dim field hospital tent somewhere in the American Southwest. No one knows the name of the photographer. No one signed the image. Yet the scene it captures feels disturbingly alive. A young German woman writhing in pain, an American surgeon leaning over her with blood on his gown, and a silent soldier holding a tray of cold steel instruments beneath a single hanging bulb. Who were these people? Why was an enemy soldier treated in the middle of the night? And what happened in the minutes before and after this shutter clicked? At first glance, it looks like a moment of horror, an amputation about to begin. But the truth behind this photograph is far stranger, far more human, and far more American than anyone expects. And the secret it holds would change one woman's life forever. August 12, 1944. Camp Hearn, Texas. The heat had already settled over the prairie when the Army truck groaned to a stop outside the camp infirmary. Dust rose in a slow, tired cloud behind it, hanging in the air like something that refused to leave. The back doors swung open, and the first thing that spilled out was the smell. Sweat, dirt, and iron. Then came the sound, a thin, choked whimper, as if someone were trying not to be heard. Anna Bauer, 27 years old and far from anything she had ever called home, clutched her ruined hand against her chest. Blood had dried in dark flakes along her wrist. Fresh beads gathered where the torn skin still responded to pain. The farm equipment had caught her in a single, merciless second during the morning work detail. One slip, one scream, one crunch of steel teeth that could have taken her whole arm if another POW hadn't yanked the lever in time. 2 American soldiers helped her down from the truck. Their hands were steady, almost gentle, but Anna recoiled anyway. She didn't know if they meant to save her or prepare her for punishment. Her breath trembled. Her boots touched the gravel. The world swayed. Inside the infirmary, the air changed. It was cool, sharp, chemical, ether and antiseptic biting through the heavy Texas heat. White lights hummed overhead. Nurses moved briskly. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a man groaned in English. Anna felt her legs threaten to give out. Her eyes drifted to the metal table, the instruments laid neatly beside it, the long gleam of the surgical knife. And she whispered the only truth she knew. In Germany. They would cut it off. The soldier beside her hesitated, unsure whether he had heard correctly. But Anna did not repeat it. She simply stared at the knife as if it were already descending. What she expected next was terror. Restraints, shouts, rough hands forcing her down. It was what the radio back home had promised, what the posters had promised, what every fearful mother in her village had whispered. Americans experiment on prisoners. Americans amputate. Americans do not waste time treating the enemy. But instead, something impossible happened. A tall American officer in a white coat stepped forward, scanning her injury with a focused, almost stern concentration. His brows knit, not in anger but in calculation, the way a craftsman might appraise a broken but salvageable piece of wood. He turned to the nurse. "Get me the sterilization set. Quickly, and penicillin. We're going to need a lot of it." Anna blinked. She wasn't sure she understood the words, but she recognized the tone. Determination, not cruelty. Still, fear clung to her like a fever. She had grown up in a country where wounds like hers meant immediate amputation. Wartime hospitals were overwhelmed, supplies were vanishing, and surgeons were forced to choose the fastest solution. Her brother had returned from the Eastern Front missing fingers that could have been saved, had someone simply had time. But this was a building with glass windows, humming bulbs, cabinets full of supplies. An American infirmary in 1944, built by a nation that could manufacture 96,000 aircraft a year and move 8 million tons of steel across the oceans. A nation wealthy enough to pour medicine into a stranger. A nation confident enough to show mercy. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Nothing in Anna's world had prepared her for it. She watched the Americans work, swift, efficient, coordinated. A nurse pressed a towel against her arm to slow the bleeding. Another adjusted her breathing mask. Someone lifted her chin to check whether she was slipping into shock. No one yelled at her. No one shoved her. No one treated her like a problem to be disposed of. The contradiction collided inside her chest. A German prisoner of war. In a U.S. Army medical ward, receiving the kind of care she had seen denied to her own countrymen. The doctor knelt slightly, meeting her eyes. "You're going to be all right," he said. "We're going to do everything we can to save your hand." Save? The word didn't register at first. She tried to speak, but her voice was a cracked whisper. You're not cutting it?" His answer came without hesitation. "Not if there's a chance we can keep it." And there is. For a moment, Anna could only stare. In her mind, she saw flashes of Germany, ration lines, dim hospital corridors, nurses apologizing because morphine had run out months ago, the exhaustion etched on every doctor's face, her mother's warning, "If you lose a limb in wartime, pray it's quick. They don't waste supplies." But here, an enemy nation, her enemy, was preparing for hours of painstaking work. For her. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The room tilted. Something warm and bewildering bloomed in her chest, warring with terror. Why were they doing this? Why would Americans, her captors, fight to save something her own collapsing country might have given up on? The doctor rose, pulling on surgical gloves. "Let's move," he said. "Time is the one thing we can't get back." Anna felt herself guided gently onto the table. The lights brightened, a mask lowered toward her face. Her heartbeat hammered thinly as the ether began to fog her mind. The last thought she clung to was not fear, but confusion, sharp and aching. Why were the Americans saving her? Why were they treating her better than she had ever expected? And then the darkness closed in, carrying the impossible truth with it. The enemy was about to spend 4 hours fighting to keep her whole. Anna drifted in and out of consciousness as the orderlies wheeled her toward the operating room. The corridor felt impossibly bright, the white walls glowing like the inside of a lighthouse. Every footstep echoed. Every metallic clatter seemed pointed, deliberate, threatening. Her breath came shallow, quick, uneven. The closer they moved toward the surgery lamps, the colder her body felt. She had been raised on warnings, whispered in kitchens during air raids, and murmured by teachers who believed every word printed in party newspapers. Americans, they said, did not waste time on prisoners. They amputated rather than treated. They experimented on living bodies. They poked and sliced in secret rooms. She had been told it so many times that it felt like fact. And now, rolled beneath a rack of stainless steel tools, she could almost hear her mother's voice again. "If the Americans capture you, pray they make it fast." The orderly pushed the swinging doors open, and the room swallowed her whole. The glow above the operating table was a white so sharp it felt like pain. Instruments lay in quiet rows gleaming under the lamps. A sheet of thin gauze rustled as a nurse adjusted it, preparing the space for the surgeon. Somewhere behind her, a monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to her fear. Anna's first instinct was to pull her hand away, to protect it, to hide it, even though it was mangled beyond recognition. She clutched it tight against her stomach as if she could keep the Americans from touching it at all. A nurse stepped closer, her voice soft but brisk. "We're going to clean the wound now. You'll be asleep soon." Anna didn't trust the words, even if she didn't fully understand them. Her heart thudded against her ribs, tight and frantic. She imagined them tying her down. She imagined the knife, the saw. She imagined waking up with nothing below the wrist. Her thoughts spiraled back to Germany, to the factory where she had once worked before conscription placed her in the Auxiliary Labor Corps. She had seen a man lose 3 fingers in an accident. There had been no anesthetic left in the clinic, no antibiotics, no sterile instruments. The doctor, sweating under dim lights powered by a failing generator, had muttered that wartime offered no luxuries. He cut the damaged fingers immediately, quickly, brutally. The man fainted from shock. No one blamed the doctor. He had no other choice. Another woman she knew had gotten her arm caught in a lathe. Her entire forearm was gone within the hour. The hospital staff barely spoke of it. There were no supplies, no time, no way to salvage anything. This was what Anna expected here. This was what she had been taught to expect. Her breathing sped up, ragged now. One of the American soldiers standing near the wall shifted uncomfortably. He looked barely 20, freckles still visible under his helmet strap. It might have been his first time seeing a POW woman in this kind of distress. His eyes darted between her and the surgical table as though he were unsure whether he should intervene or offer comfort. He whispered under his breath to the other guard, "She looks terrified." The older soldier nodded. They've been fed lies their whole lives. Can't blame her. But Anna heard only fragments of English, muffled pieces of phrases she didn't understand. The unfamiliar language made everything worse. Every syllable could be a sentence about her fate. 2 nurses lifted her injured arm to examine the extent of the damage. When they touched her, she gasped sharply, jerking away out of pure instinct. "We need to take it," one of the nurses began, meaning take the glove off her good hand. But Anna didn't hear the rest. She seized on the first words. "We may have to take it." Her mind snapped into panic. "Take it! Take it! Take the hand!" "No! Bitte nein!" she cried, twisting, trying to pull away from them. Her legs kicked weakly against the table. The room spun. Tears blurred the edges of her vision. She believed with absolute certainty that they were seconds away from sawing through her wrist. The young soldier stepped forward, hands raised in helpless reassurance. "No one's hurting you. Hey, it's okay." But his voice trembled. This was not a situation his training manual had prepared him for. The older soldier placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Let the medical staff handle it." Anna caught pieces of the exchange, but not enough to quell her terror. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her hand surged, white-hot and blinding. She cried out, collapsing back against the pillow. The nurse hurried to steady her. No, lie back. It's all right. We're not amputating. We're helping you." But Anna had heard a different story all her life. Americans do not treat prisoners. Americans do not save German lives. Americans do not waste medicine on enemies. And, above all, if they take you to surgery, you will not come back the same. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. Her throat tightened. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life, shrinking inside a country she had been told to fear. One of the nurses spoke quietly to another. "Poor thing must think we're going to butcher her." It wasn't said cruelly. It was sympathy, even pity. But the words weren't meant for Anna to understand. The older soldier leaned against the wall, exhaling through his nose. "Hard to believe they think this of us." The younger one nodded. Guess they never saw the inside of a real American hospital. And it was true. America in 1944 possessed more functioning hospitals than the entire Axis combined. Industrial states like Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Illinois had built not just war machines, but medical equipment, sterilizers, surgical steel kits packed by factory workers who wrote small notes like, "For our boys," and "Come home safe." Many of those kits ended up here in POW camps, because the Geneva Convention required that enemy prisoners receive the same standard of care as American troops. Even penicillin, precious, miraculous penicillin, flowed freely in U.S. military hospitals by mid-1944, produced by American factories in quantities once thought impossible. Germany, by contrast, had almost none. Their wounded died from infections Americans now treated in minutes. Anna did not know any of this. She only knew her hand throbbed with every heartbeat, and her fear throbbed even louder. A doctor approached her, Dr. Miller, though she did not yet know his name. He glanced at the chart, then at her pale, shaking face. He saw the fear before he saw the wound. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. "She's terrified," he murmured to the nurse beside him. "Of us," the nurse whispered back. Dr. Miller exhaled slowly. "Let's show her she has nothing to fear." But Anna didn't hear his reassurance. Her mind was too full of propaganda posters, ones showing American doctors with monstrous hands, syringes like daggers, prisoners strapped down. She remembered radio broadcasts promising that U.S. surgeons harvested organs. She remembered soldiers in her village laughing bitterly that, if captured, they would rather die than be taken alive. And now she was here, alive, injured, vulnerable. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Bitte, don't take it. Don't take my hand." The young soldier flinched as if the plea had physically struck him. Dr. Miller moved closer and spoke gently, but Anna was too far inside her terror to understand. Tears streamed down her temples, dampening the pillow beneath her. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. The ether mask hovered inches above her face, ready to lower. But fear held her stronger than any strap could. To her, this moment felt like the end. To the Americans standing around her, the shock was different. The realization that this woman, this frightened, injured young woman, truly believed they were here to harm her. And in that clash of fear and disbelief, the room held its breath, suspended in a tension that would not break until kindness shattered it in the next act. Dr. Samuel Miller had spent the better part of his life inside rooms like this, bright, sterile, humming with quiet urgency. He was 38 now, his hair already showing a few early streaks of gray at the temples, though he carried himself with the steadiness of someone much older. Before the war, he'd been a surgeon in Houston, known for his calm hands and long hours. After Tunisia took his younger brother in 1943, he stopped waiting for letters that would never come and volunteered for the army. He had promised himself that wherever he was sent, he would save lives. It didn't matter whose. When he stepped into the operating room and saw Anna's hand for the first time, he didn't flinch. He studied the torn flesh, the crushed tendons, the mangled fingers, the kind of injury that made most surgeons default to amputation. But Miller wasn't most surgeons. He assessed the wound the way a craftsman assesses a broken violin. There were elements that were beyond repair, yes, but the structure, the possibility, remained. He set the chart down. "Not on my table," he said quietly. "We save what can be saved." The nurse beside him exhaled with relief. The young soldier in the corner straightened a little, as if proud of a decision he hadn't made but believed in anyway. Anna, trembling on the table, didn't fully understand the words, but she understood the tone. And when Dr. Miller stepped closer, she watched him like someone watching the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether he meant to push or pull her to safety. He reached for her injured arm with both hands. Not roughly, not clinically, but gently, warm fingers supporting her elbow, steadying the broken hand as though it were something precious instead of something ruined. Anna gasped. The touch startled her, not because of pain, but because of its tenderness. No one had touched her with that kind of care since long before the war began. Her lips trembled. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Dr. Miller's voice softened. "It's all right. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign. He examined the wound again, rotating it slightly, paying attention to the color of the exposed tissue, the edges of the torn skin, the faint twitch in the tendons that meant the nerves were still alive. "We've got a window," he murmured to the nurse. "If we work fast." A tray of instruments appeared at his side, each tool gleaming under the surgical lights. Row after row of polished stainless steel manufactured in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and other American cities that had turned their factories from cars and radios to war supplies. Even the forceps were stamped with the emblem of a Michigan plant that once produced household appliances. America's industrial might reached all the way into this small Texas infirmary. And then came something even more extraordinary: penicillin. A nurse opened a fresh vial, crystal clear, bright as hope. The label still held a faint chemical smell from the factory in Peoria, Illinois, where the United States had achieved the impossible only months earlier, mass-producing penicillin at a rate the world had never seen. By summer 1944, American plants were producing over 2.3 million doses a month, enough to send to hospitals, field stations, and even POW camps. Germany, by contrast, had almost none. Their researchers had discovered the drug, but their factories were bombed, their materials scarce, their methods incomplete. For wounded Germans, infection was often the real killer. Amputation was the only way to outrun it. Anna didn't know any of that, but she saw the Americans handle the vial with the seriousness of someone preparing a miracle. Her voice broke. War room. Why? Why were they using medicine on her? Why waste any of this on someone like her? Dr. Miller adjusted the mask over her nose. "We're giving you something to help you sleep. When you wake up, your hand will still be yours." She choked back another sob. The kindness felt unbearable. Within moments, the ether began to take her, softening the edges of the room, dimming the shapes above her. Her last glimpse before slipping under was Dr. Miller leaning over her, eyes steady, jaw set, not with anger or disgust, but with purpose. Then darkness. The surgery began. For 4 hours, the room turned into a world with its own heartbeat. A world defined by precision, determination, and the quiet grit of American medical skill. Nurses moved like a well-rehearsed symphony, handing tools, adjusting lamps, cooling the doctor's brow when sweat gathered under the heat. Dr. Miller worked with the patience of a sculptor. He irrigated the wound, flushing out dirt and rust from the shattered farm machine. He examined each tendon, deciding which could be saved. He trimmed damaged tissue millimeter by millimeter, preserving every strand that still held life. "Good vascular response," he murmured. "Better than I expected." The nurse smiled behind her mask. "She's young. Her chances are strong." He nodded without breaking focus. When he found a tendon still intact, he looked almost triumphant. "This one can be repaired. Hand me the 4 Nero silk." He stitched carefully, looping delicate thread through the trembling line of living tissue. His hands never shook. Somewhere in his mind, somewhere deep beneath the discipline and training, he wondered if his younger brother would have survived Tunisia had he been given the kind of care this woman was receiving now. The thought always came to him during surgery. It kept him sharp. As he worked, the young soldier watching from the wall whispered, "He's really putting everything he's got into this." The older soldier replied, "Sam Miller always does. Doesn't matter who's on the table." Halfway through the operation, the doctor paused long enough to examine a segment of crushed bone. "We'll have to stabilize this," he said, "but she'll keep the hand." The nurse reset the lamps. Forceps clicked. More sutures followed. Skin was repositioned and aligned. He harvested a small graft from her forearm, shaping it gently to fit the torn skin at the base of her thumb. He sealed it with care, pressing it into place like a craftsman fitting a final piece into a mosaic. Finally, hours after the operation began, Dr. Miller stepped back and exhaled. The room seemed to release its tension with him. The hand was not perfect. It would bear scars. Some fingers would be stiff. She would need time, therapy, patience. But it was hers, and it was alive. The nurse cleaned the edges one last time, wrapping the hand in clean white bandages that glowed under the lights like a symbol. Fragile, preserved, fought for. Dr. Miller stripped off his gloves. His face was damp with sweat, his shoulders tired, but his eyes held that same resolute calm. "Let's get her to recovery," he said softly. The young soldier followed the stretcher as they wheeled Anna out. He couldn't help staring at her hand, wrapped, protected, saved. Something about it struck him deeply, unexpectedly. He thought about how his father, a farmer before the war, had told him, "You judge a country by how it treats the people who can do nothing for it." He swallowed hard. When they reached the recovery room, Anna stirred faintly. The drugs held her under, but a single tear slipped from her closed eye, trailing across her temple. She didn't know the details of what had just happened. She didn't know the hours of concentration, the cost of supplies, or the care given to someone the world had labeled enemy. But somewhere inside the fog of anesthesia, her body knew it had been saved. And the Americans who watched her rest, soldiers, nurses, a tired surgeon still wiping his brow, felt something warm, steady, and unmistakably proud. This is who we were. Good, decent, merciful. Anna woke slowly, as if rising through layers of water. At first, she felt nothing. No pain, no fear. Only the distant murmur of voices drifting across the room. Then light pierced through her eyelids, warm and golden, not the harsh white glare of the operating lamps. Something soft supported her back. Something cool rested on her forehead. She inhaled, expecting the sting of disinfectant, but instead she caught the faint scent of soap and cotton. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt a bandage around her hand. Her heartbeat quickened. Her breath caught. Panic clawed its way up her chest as her eyes snapped open. The room came into focus slowly. A window with thin curtains stirring in the Texas breeze. A table with neatly arranged medical supplies. A soldier seated beside the door with a book in his lap. And beside her bed, adjusting the height of the lamp, stood Dr. Miller. He turned when he heard her stir. "Welcome back," he said gently. Anna tried to sit up, but the motion sent a bolt of pain through her arm. She winced, sinking back against the pillow. "It's all right," he said, stepping closer. "Take your time." Her mind scrambled to assemble memories. Bright lights, cold metal, the surge of fear before darkness swallowed her. She remembered crying, begging them not to take her hand. She remembered the whisper she had spoken into the mask. Bitte. Don't cut it. Her gaze darted to the bandage. It was thick, clean, wrapped with careful precision. Her fingers twitched underneath it. The sensation was faint, muffled, but it was there. Her voice came out hoarse. My hand. Dr. Miller nodded slowly, letting the moment settle before he spoke. We saved it. The words hit her like a blow, not gently, not gradually, but with force, an emotional collapse so sudden and overwhelming that she couldn't hold herself together. Her chest tightened, and before she could swallow the feeling down, the sob tore out of her. She cried, not softly, not politely, but with the raw, uncontrollable sound of someone whose reality has cracked open. Tears streamed down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them. She turned her face away, ashamed, gripping the bedsheet with her good hand. Her whole body shook as if releasing years of fear. The soldier by the door lowered his book, stunned by the intensity of it. Dr. Miller didn't move for a moment. He simply let her cry, letting the storm run its course. Finally, he pulled a chair beside her bed and sat. You're safe, he said quietly. Your hand is safe. But that only made her cry harder. Minutes passed, the kind of minutes that feel full and heavy, as if time itself is holding its breath. When she finally found enough air to speak, her voice cracked under the weight of the truth she'd carried for years. I thought... She swallowed hard. I thought you would punish me. Her eyes flickered up to meet his. I thought you hated us. The soldier in the corner pressed his lips together. He hadn't expected the words to wound him, but they did. Something about hearing an enemy believe they deserved cruelty struck deeper than he knew. Dr. Miller folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. We don't hate you, he said. You're a patient, a human being. That's enough. Anna closed her eyes, trembling. The tears slowed, but her breathing still shook. Her mind drifted, unbidden, back to Germany, to her father's return from Stalingrad. He had survived frostbite and artillery, only to lose his arm in a field hospital that stank of disinfectant and desperation. Supplies were too scarce for proper anesthesia. She remembered standing outside the curtain, hearing his muffled scream as the saw cut through bone. When the doctor emerged, pale and exhausted, he muttered, There was no choice. We have nothing left. She remembered her mother boiling turnips during the turnip winter, when rations shrank to almost nothing. Eating 200 calories a day if they were lucky. Less if the rail lines had been bombed that week. Children fainted in school. Old people wasted away. Hospitals closed entire wings because there were no bandages, no antiseptics, no morphine, and always the shadow of the Gestapo. Everyone lived with the fear that a careless comment, a sigh of doubt, a question asked too loudly, could make someone disappear. She had learned early not to speak her fears, not to express grief, not to question anything. War had stripped Germany of so much: food, medicine, freedom, hope, and yet here she was, in the hands of the enemy. And they had saved what her own homeland would have taken. She opened her eyes again. The room wavered through the film of tears. In Germany, she whispered, they would have cut it off. They would not waste anything on someone like me. The confession came with a tremor of shame. Dr. Miller didn't respond right away. He let her words sit between them, absorbing their meaning. He had treated enough POWs to know what Germany had become by 1944. He had seen malnourished prisoners arrive in camp with ribs showing and infections raging. He had read reports from Europe, bombed hospitals, broken supply lines, doctors forced to choose who lived and who died because survival hinged on speed, not skill. "We're not Germany," he said gently. "We're America. We do things differently." Anna's face crumpled again, but this time the tears were quieter, less like panic, more like grief, or gratitude. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Why would you help me? I'm your enemy." The young soldier stepped forward as if compelled by something more than duty. "Ma'am, my granddad used to say you judge a country by how it treats people who can't give it anything back." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly self-conscious. "I figure we just do what's right." Anna stared at him. A strange ache blossomed in her chest, an ache that wasn't pain, but recognition. These men, these strangers, were showing her a kind of mercy she hadn't known existed anymore. She whispered, "I don't deserve this." Dr. Miller shook his head. "This isn't about deserving. This is about humanity." Humanity, a word she hadn't heard spoken without irony in a long time. She pressed her uninjured hand to her eyes, shaking. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the doctor replied. "Just heal." Silence settled between them, warm and gentle. The harsh edges of the room felt softer now, as if her collapse had washed away the last traces of fear. Anna took a slow breath. The bandage felt warm around her hand. The pain sharp but alive. Alive in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. She studied it with awe and disbelief, as though it were a gift she hadn't earned. In that moment, an unbearable truth formed inside her. The enemy had saved her, with a level of compassion her own country no longer had to give. Her tears trailed down her cheeks again, but now they carried something new. Gratitude, so deep it rattled her bones. The young soldier looked away, swallowing hard. Dr. Miller rested a steady hand on the side of her bed before standing. As he moved toward the door, Anna whispered one more time, not in fear now, but in humbled wonder. "My grandfather served," the soldier murmured, watching her. "He would have done the same." And for the first time since the war began, she believed that maybe kindness was not a weakness. Maybe mercy, even in war, was its own kind of strength. And maybe America was showing her a truth she had never been allowed to see. The recovery ward at Camp Hearn was quiet in the late afternoons. Sunlight filtered through the high windows in long golden stripes, dust motes drifting lazily through the beams. Outside, the cicadas hummed as if the heat itself were singing. Inside, the only sounds were the soft rustle of sheets, the muted clink of medical trays, and the rhythmic footsteps of nurses passing from bed to bed. Anna sat propped against two pillows, her bandaged hand resting carefully atop a folded towel. She had stared at the white wrappings for so long that the edges of the gauze seemed etched into her memory. The pain was still there, sharp at times, dull at others, but beneath it she felt something deeper, something she couldn't name. Her hand was still hers, because Americans had chosen to save it. She flexed her fingers as much as the bandages would allow. The tiny movement felt like a miracle. For much of her life, she had been taught that enemies were not human. They were monsters, threats, creatures from propaganda posters. But here, on a simple hospital bed in Texas, she had learned what thousands of German POWs had quietly written in their diaries. The Americans don't treat us like enemies. They treat us like humans. The truth of it settled over her like a warm blanket. A nurse approached, checking her pulse, adjusting the sling supporting her arm. She smiled gently. "You're healing well," she said. "Dr. Miller will be pleased." Anna nodded but said nothing. She was still learning how to speak without fear. After the nurse left, Anna looked again at her hand. The careful wrapping, the precise stitching beneath it, the hours someone had spent fighting for something Germany would have discarded. These things formed a quiet revelation. Mercy is stronger than hate. The words came to her not as a thought, but as a realization, clear and undeniable. Within a few days, word spread through the POW camp. German women who worked laundry detail whispered about the surgery. Women assigned to the kitchen paused near the water barrels to murmur questions. Even those who had arrived hardened by months in transit. Crowded trains, hunger, guards barking orders, stole glances toward the infirmary. One afternoon, 2 women from Anna's work unit visited her. They stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, unsure whether they were allowed to speak. "How bad is it?" one finally asked. Anna lifted her wrapped hand gently. "It will heal." The women exchanged startled glances. "They didn't take it?" the older one asked, her voice low as if bracing for the answer. "No," Anna replied softly. "They saved it." She watched their faces shift, from skepticism to confusion, to something like hope. Another woman nearby overheard and whispered to her friend, "In America, the enemy saves you." Across the room, a young American medic paused in his work, pretending not to hear but unable to hide the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Something subtle began to change in the camp after that. The next time a German woman cut her palm on a broken fence wire, she went willingly to the infirmary. Another who fainted from heat stroke allowed the Americans to help without flinching. There were fewer tense shoulders, fewer frightened backward steps when guards approached, not because captivity had become easy, but because the fear had softened, cracked open by the simple, radical act of compassion shown to Anna. The shift did not go unnoticed by the Americans. One evening, as soldiers escorted work details back through the gates, the young soldier who had watched Anna's surgery said quietly to his partner, "You see how they look at us now? It's different somehow." His partner nodded. Respect goes both ways. But for Anna, the change was deeper, almost disorienting. Each night, when the ward quieted and the lamps dimmed, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the surgery in her mind. Dr. Miller's voice telling her she was safe, the warm, steady touch of his hands. The hours he had spent repairing something that had no value to the war effort, something that belonged to an enemy. She wondered what her father would think of this place, of the clean sheets, the readily available medicine, the way American staff treated prisoners with a dignity Germany no longer afforded its own wounded. She imagined telling him that an American doctor had saved her hand. She imagined his disbelief and his relief. War, she realized, had shown her a new truth. Strength was not only measured in weapons or victories. America had won something greater than land or battles. America had won the moral high ground. It was a victory built not of steel but of character, an ethic woven into the very way they treated those they had every right to despise. As she thought this, gratitude swelled in her chest, heavy and humbling. On the 5th day, Dr. Miller visited her again. His steps were steady, his presence calming. He checked her bandage, asked about the pain, and nodded approvingly when she reported progress. "You're healing quickly," he said. "In a few weeks we'll start movement exercises." Anna hesitated before speaking. "Doctor." He looked up. She swallowed, searching for the right words. "Thank you. For everything." He gave a modest shrug. "It's my job." But she shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You didn't have to save it." He met her gaze evenly. Yes, he said, I did. There was no pride in his voice, no boastfulness, only conviction. Quiet, unwavering, unmistakably American. In that moment, she understood something that she knew would stay with her for the rest of her life. America did not win the war because it had the most guns or the strongest factories, though it had those in abundance. America won because it refused to surrender its humanity. Dr. Miller stood, making a final note on her chart. Rest, he said. You've been through a great deal. As he turned to leave, Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not the heat of fever, but the warmth of awakening. She had come into this ward terrified, convinced she would be mutilated or punished, but she was leaving it with her hand saved, her dignity restored, and her understanding of the world changed. She watched the doctor's silhouette fade into the hallway light. This, she thought, is what true greatness looks like. Not the rigid propaganda of home, not the empty promises of victory, not the harshness that called itself strength, but kindness, mercy, humanity. And when American viewers decades later would watch her story, many would feel the same pull in their chests, the quiet stirring of pride and longing. This, they would think, is the America I want to believe in. In the quiet days that followed Anna's surgery, life in Camp Hearn settled back into its steady rhythm. Roll call at dawn, work details in the heat, the hiss of steam from the kitchen, the hum of distant generators at night. Yet something intangible had shifted, a small but unmistakable change in the air. It was in the way German women walked to the infirmary without fear now, and in the way the American guards nodded to them, not as victors but as men performing a duty with dignity. Watching these small gestures unfold, it becomes impossible not to reflect on the country that made them possible. America, in the 1940s, was far from perfect. No nation is. But it stood on a foundation that felt solid, shared, and deeply understood. This was a country where people believed in something larger than themselves, in duty, in sacrifice, in the idea that strength meant more than overwhelming force. It meant moral clarity. It meant living up to the promises written in its own founding documents. Industries across the nation roared to life, not only to feed the war machine but to save lives. Factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania didn't just produce tanks and bombers. They produced surgical instruments, clean linens, medical kits, penicillin by the ton. They produced the very tools that saved Anna's hand. These efforts were not anomalies. They were part of a national character. When German POWs were brought to America, tired, frightened, and conditioned to expect brutality, they found something extraordinary instead. Camps where they were fed well, often better than civilians back in Europe. Medical wards cleaner and better supplied than anything most of them had ever seen. Meals that sometimes included fresh meat, vegetables, even steak. Work assignments on American farms where families treated them with unexpected courtesy. Tens of thousands of German prisoners experienced this, and in their diaries, found long after the war ended, they wrote with stunned gratitude about how Americans had treated them. It wasn't leniency. It wasn't softness. It was principle. A belief that the measure of a nation was not how it treated its allies, but how it treated its enemies. That belief defined the greatest generation. They did not see kindness as weakness. They saw it as proof of confidence, proof that America was strong enough not to betray its own values, even during humanity's darkest hour. And yet, as modern audiences listen to Anna's story, a different emotion rises alongside pride, longing, because the America of the 1940s, its unity, its moral certainty, its shared purpose, feels distant now. Today, the country wrestles with deep divisions, suspicion, and waves of cynicism. For many, it feels as though the old pillars have cracked, and people are left wondering whether the nation they inherited still resembles the one their grandparents fought for. They watch a story like Anna's and feel a tug in their chest. Not just because Americans did something good, but because it reminds them of who Americans believed themselves to be. A viewer might pause the video, stare for a moment, and whisper, "We used to be this kind of country." A country where a surgeon would spend 4 hours saving the hand of an enemy because saving it was the right thing to do. A country where guards looked after POWs not with cruelty but with responsibility. A country where, even in war, Americans chose mercy, not because they sought praise, but because conscience demanded it. History often focuses on battles, victories, leaders, and treaties. But the true soul of a nation lives in the quiet decisions made by ordinary people. A doctor picking up a scalpel, a nurse offering a gentle touch, a guard showing dignity to someone terrified. These moments, small, uncelebrated, unrecorded in official histories, shape how future generations understand the past. And so, when Americans today hear Anna's story, many feel pride sharpened by nostalgia. They imagine their fathers, grandfathers, or great-grandfathers wearing those uniforms, carrying those values. They see in the greatest generation a reflection of what America once strove to be, what America could be again. They feel gratitude, not only for the moral courage shown to prisoners like Anna, but for the legacy of decency handed down through the years like an heirloom. Because the truth at the heart of her story is simple and powerful. America was at its best when it chose mercy. That choice, over and over by thousands of unnamed Americans, became a quiet victory. One not measured in territory or treaties, but in humanity. A victory that helped shape the world's perception of the United States long after the war ended. Anna's saved hand became more than a medical success. It became a symbol of compassion in conflict, of character under pressure, of a nation that believed in right even when the world was tearing itself apart. And in the soft glow of that memory, many Americans feel a longing not just for the past, but for a future in which those values thrive again. A future where the country remembers that strength and mercy are not opposites, where kindness is not seen as weakness, where a nation's greatness is measured, still, by how it treats the people who can give it nothing in return. The sun was beginning its slow descent when Dr. Miller returned to the recovery yard that evening, its fading light spilling across the Texas plain like brushed gold. The air was warm, still, and quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a place that has seen suffering give way to hope. Anna sat on a wooden bench just outside the infirmary door, her posture careful, her bandaged hand resting in her lap. She looked different now. Not healed, not yet, but steadier, clearer, like someone who had walked through a storm and finally found a patch of sky. Dr. Miller approached, the white of his coat glowing faintly in the amber light. "How's the hand feeling today?" he asked. Anna lifted it slowly, flexing her fingers as much as the wrapping allowed. The movement was small, trembling, but real. "Better," she whispered. "I can feel it again. I didn't think I would." The doctor nodded with a gentle pride, folding his arms. "It will take time, but you'll get there." She hesitated, her eyes tracing the bandages. Why did you do it?" she asked. 4 hours, for someone like me." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sank to one knee so he could look her directly in the eyes. Not as a surgeon addressing a patient. but as a man speaking to another human being. "We don't cut off what can still heal," he said quietly. The words settled around her like a warm wind, as if the land itself were holding them. She understood instantly that he wasn't just talking about her hand. He was talking about people, about nations, about wounds far bigger than the one wrapped around her fingers. A lump rose in her throat. She nodded, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. Behind them, the door creaked open and 2 other German POW women stepped out into the yard. One of them, the younger of the pair, stopped in her tracks when she saw Anna moving her hand. Her lips parted, and her eyes shone with something that looked like disbelief turning into gratitude. "America saved more than a hand today," she whispered. Dr. Miller heard it. He didn't turn, but the faintest hint of emotion tugged at the corner of his mouth. As Anna continued her slow exercises, the sky bloomed into shades of purple and orange. The guards shifted into evening positions. From somewhere beyond the barracks, a harmonica played a simple tune, a soldier unwinding after his shift. The camp lights flickered on, one by one. It was a peaceful scene, peaceful in a world still at war. And in moments like this, the larger meaning of her story revealed itself, not only to her but to anyone listening in generations to come. The greatest generation earned its name not merely by winning battles, but by how it carried itself through them, by what it chose to protect, by the moral spine that refused to bend even when hatred, fear, and violence pressed against it from all sides. America in 1944 had unmatched industrial power, an economy roaring at full strength, millions of workers building the arsenal of democracy. But its true strength, its enduring greatness, was something deeper. In the darkest chapter of human history, America still chose humanity, not just toward allies, not just toward civilians, but toward enemy prisoners, toward men and women who wore the wrong uniform. In a time when the world was tearing itself apart, the United States insisted on mercy, on decency, on honor. Tens of thousands of German POWs experienced this firsthand. They came expecting torture and starvation. Many arrived thin, frightened, conditioned to believe that Americans were monsters. Instead, they found medical care. They found clean food, clean water, clean sheets. They found fairness. They found dignity. And long after the war ended, many of them wrote home about it. They told their children, their grandchildren. They told historians who couldn't believe the records until they read the diaries themselves. It was not weakness, it was not softness, it was conviction. America believed in the value of a human life, even an enemy's. When viewers today hear Anna's story, something stirs deep inside them, a sense of pride, because this is the America their grandparents built, a sense of gratitude, because the world they live in was shaped by that moral strength, a sense of comparison, because today's divisions feel so far from that shared purpose. And finally, a sense of hope, because remembering the past is often the first step toward rebuilding the future. Anna's saved hand becomes more than a medical success. It becomes an emblem, a quiet reminder of what America once stood for. Kindness didn't make America weak. It made America great. The golden light deepened around them. Dr. Miller rose to his feet and gave Anna a final nod. "Keep practicing," he said. "You'll get stronger every day." She looked up at him, this stranger from the other side of the world who had changed her life with nothing more than skill, patience, and compassion. "Thank you," she murmured. "For everything." He touched the brim of his cap lightly. "Take care." Then he walked toward the infirmary, his silhouette outlined against the Texas sunset. A simple, ordinary figure, yet carrying the quiet nobility of a generation that believed character mattered more than cruelty. Anna watched him go, lifting her hand once more. Her fingers trembled, but they moved. Behind her, the other POW woman repeated the words softly, reverently. America saved more than a hand today. And in that single sentence lived the entire lesson, a message not just for the past, but for the nation listening now. We were at our best when we chose mercy. We were strongest when we chose humanity, and we can be that country again.